What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. As you guys can tell by the title, today we're going to be doing an engine swap and transmission swap on the G37 coupe. Now, I've done countless G35 coupes and 350Zs, but this is going to be the first G37 that I've done. I've done a lot of work on these, but just I haven't removed the engine, so it's going to be a learning experience for both. So this G37 coupe has a bad engine and a transmission, so we're going to just remove the entire assembly together as one unit. I have the replacement engine and transmission right here. This is a 5-speed automatic transmission. But like I said, this process is going to be the same for the 370Zs. There might be some differences, but overall, it's not going to be too difficult. It is really hot out here right now, so I'm going to just take my time so I don't pass out. Before I start disassembling this vehicle, I want to make sure that I get everything kind of organized and ready. So I did lay my tools out. I have pretty much everything that needs to get done already. So I have the replacement engine all wrapped up and everything pretty much ready to go. So this job that we're about to do is a big job, and it can be dangerous, so just be careful if you're gonna try to do this by yourself. What I'm gonna do so that I can have more hood clearance here is start off by removing these guys from right here. So I'll go ahead and take both of them off from both sides so that the engine hood can open more. And as you can see, that is much better now. We have a ton of clearance. When we bring our cherry picker, the hood is not going to make contact with it anymore. So that's one of the first things that you should do. As you guys can see, this vehicle has seen better days. It doesn't have a bumper, and it looks like it's been in a crash in the past, and it also doesn't have a crash bar. So those are some things that you're gonna have to remove when you are doing this engine swap. Everything here in the front needs to come off. So the radiator, the condenser, the core support, AC compressor needs to be pushed off to the side, alternator needs to be pushed off to the side. All those things need to come out. Now, I have seen a ton of videos showing you guys how to do this swap on G37s. However, there's some things that I kind of disagree with what I'm seeing online. So I figured I was going to show you guys how I do these engine removals. They're not too complicated, and I feel like a lot of people make them harder than they need to be by trying to disconnect the harness from the engine while the engine is still in the car. By doing that, that's just going to add a lot of time and frustration, so I don't recommend for you guys to remove the engine harness from the engine if the engine is still in the car. I recommend you disconnect the ECU connection down there and pull the whole wiring harness with the engine and transmission. That's what I'm going to do today, and it should save us a lot of time. I'm going to go ahead and start draining the fluids. So I'm going to go ahead and jack up the vehicle, start draining the coolant, start draining the engine oil and the transmission. I'm also going to jack up the rear because I need to disconnect the drive shaft from the differential. So I have the vehicle lifted up from the ground on jack stands. What I'd like to do first is disconnect the drive shaft from the transmission. While I'm under there, I'm going to go ahead and remove the coolant, the oil, and the transmission fluid. I'm also going to disconnect the Y pipe from the cats while I'm there, and I'm also going to disconnect the cat bracket. I'm going to go ahead and do that now so that I don't have to go underneath, at least until, I'm doing the whole removal. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. You can also disconnect your transmission mount as well at this point. The transmission drain bolt is a 19 millimeter. I'm gonna go ahead and drain this transmission now, because if I don't drain it when I remove it, it's gonna make a mess all over the garage floor. Lastly, I'll drain the coolant. If it's not dirty, I like to collect it so that I can reuse it. I'll let the coolant drain, but what I'll do in the meantime is disconnect the white pipe from the cats. I'm also going to disconnect the cat bracket that kind of holds them together. And then I'll move my way back to the rear of the vehicle and start disconnecting the drive shaft from the differential. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove the carrier bearing fasteners as well, so that the drive shaft can hang down low and I can move it off to the side and remove it from the transmission. After I do all that, I think what I'll do next is disconnect the transmission from the transmission mount so that it hangs down a little bit. So far, what I did was disconnected the white pipe from the cats. So those are going to be 14 millimeters. You're going to need a breaker bar or a strong impact with the swivel to remove those. I also disconnected the cat bracket along with the O2 sensor connections, and then I did remove the transmission mount along with the bracket, and it did drop quite a bit. When you're doing that, just be careful that you're not directly underneath the transmission, because it can hit you in the head. But other than that, it's not going to drop too much. As you guys can see, it's not really dangling down too low. At this point, what you want to do is you want to go in the back and start disconnecting the drive shaft from the differential. You want to make sure that your car is in neutral so that you can spin the drive shaft so that you can get to all the fasteners. Those should be 17 millimeters. Once you disconnect it from there, you're also going to disconnect it from the center bearing, which is in the middle of the exhaust. There's a shield covering it, so there is I believe 4 10 millimeter fasteners that you need to get out of the way to remove that bracket. And then once you do that, there's 2 14 millimeters holding down that center bearing to the frame. Once you do that, you should be able to drop your drive shaft and pull it out so that you can remove it from the transmission. What I'll do now is I'll go ahead and do that, but I also want to disconnect the rod that goes to your gear selector. There's a 12 millimeter nut on there that you want to go ahead and remove. I'll show you guys when it's out of the vehicle how it looks like, but all you want to do is just remove that nut so that you can get that rod out of there. There's that 12 millimeter fastener that you need to remove so that you can get that rod free. Want to make sure to disconnect that right there. There you have it. Put the nut back on so you don't lose it. So we'll move back there and start disconnecting the drive shaft. But I think what I'm going to do now is just remove this shield right here so that I can get access to those 14 millimeter fasteners holding down the carrier bearing. There's this little bracket here and another shield that you want to remove. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So now that you have removed the bracket along with that shield, you'll have better access here to those 2 14 millimeter fasteners that are holding the carrier bearing on. So go ahead and remove those now, and then we'll work our way towards the back of the vehicle to remove the differential bolts on the drive shaft. So we got those 2 14 millimeter fasteners out, and this guy's pretty much loose. We have to go back there to disconnect the drive shaft from the differential, but as you guys can see, there's another shield kind of covering that up. So we had to remove from what I can see, I believe 6 10 millimeter fasteners that hold that shield on. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. All right, so as you guys can see, I did remove that shield that's covering the drive shaft right here. So as you can see, I have a 17 millimeter wrench and a 17 millimeter swivel on that fastener right there, and I also have an extension just poking out. You can remove these fasteners by using 2 17 millimeter wrenches and just breaking them loose that way. However, I like using my impact just because it makes things a lot faster for me, in my opinion. So I'm gonna go ahead and break these guys loose and remove the dry shaft from the differential. I have the dry shaft disconnected from the transmission. It's kind of just hanging over there. This was a little finicky because of that rubber isolating thing there. So it is possible to remove it and set it off to the side with the exhaust on, as you guys can see. I just kind of had to work with it, and I was able to disconnect it from the transmission. At this point, we're pretty much done underneath. We're gonna go to the front of the vehicle and start working our way at removing the radiator, AC condenser, all the accessories, and start getting ready to pull the engine. I will go inside of the vehicle on the passenger side and disconnect the ECU from the wiring harness and pull the wiring harness out, and that'll be probably the last step that I'll do. What I'm gonna do next is remove the wiring loom that comes from the cabin right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and go inside on the passenger side and disconnect the wiring harness to the ECU. Then I'll come back up here and start removing this wiring harness so that I can remove it with the engine. I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then once I have that wiring loom kind of free, I'm gonna start working on the front, removing the radiator, the lines that go to the transmission. When you come to the passenger side, there's going to be a black cover that is kind of hiding everything underneath here. You just want to go ahead and pry down, and that will come down. Once you do that, you're going to start working your way at disconnecting the connections to the ECU, which are all in there. It's hard to record, and there's just some tabs holding it in place. Go ahead and get these guys off and start wiggling the harness through the top. I have the wiring harness removed from the ECU. It's pretty simple to disconnect these connectors. You have to kind of do one by one. So what you do is you push down on this little plastic tab. When you push down on that, you should be able to move this lever here back, and it will disconnect the connection. So right here, I can't do it with one hand because it kind of latched again, but you want to tap that little tab in. You want to push down on that tab, that little one right there. Once you do that, this lever here will push back and the connector will be free. Alright, so in order to remove all this out of the way, there will be a lot of plastic clips here. A lot of these guys are missing from this car, but there's going to be a series of 10, 12, and there should be some 14mm fasteners in here. I'm going to go ahead and get this guy off. I'm going to get this tubes off, and I'm gonna start working my way at removing this core support. I'm gonna try to not disconnect the AC lines depending on how they move. I might be able to get away with it. If not, I will have to disconnect those lines. So you are gonna have to evacuate that Freon. So I am gonna go ahead and start working at this. A lot of this is very easy, so I'm gonna time lapse it for you guys. Just 10s, 12s, 14s, not really a big deal. So I'll go ahead and get this guy out. Alright guys, so as you can see, I'm still working my way at removing the engine here. I have the core support pretty much loose. I had to disconnect the AC compressor from the engine and the power steering pump as well. And I think I might disconnect the alternator just so that I kind of set that off to the side. As you guys can tell, the headlights are just kind of hanging. There's a lot of zip ties and a lot of self-tapping screws and the headlights, so I just kind of left them attached. As you can see, they're all just attached by zip ties, so that's not gonna get in the way. I just have them dangling there, zip tied to whatever is holding them on. What I need to do next is go underneath, disconnect those two transmission lines that you guys see down there. And then after I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the belt and start working my way at removing some of the accessories. Alright, so as you guys can tell, I have the AC compressor off to the side. There is three 12mm fasteners that hold this guy on. So there's one up here, one down there, and then there's one right here in the back. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a little bolt that goes through the back. These are all 12mm. I did zip tie that off to the side right there. I didn't disconnect the AC lines. I just kind of bent them back a little bit, not too bad. That way I won't have to drain the Freon from the vehicle. So what I'll do next is disconnect the power steering pump along with the alternator. I did already remove the tension from the tensioner here, and I'll put a bolt on there. This is a half-inch drive that you're gonna need for that. So once you get everything like that, you'll go ahead and start doing this, and then after that we should be able to loosen up the two 17mm fasteners that are holding the two motor mounts onto the frame. But before we get too ahead, we're gonna bring the cherry picker up here and start disconnecting a few more things like the fuel line and a few grounds, like this guy right here. We'll have to disconnect these grounds. So there's quite a bit more work still that needs to be done, and I'll get this guy off in the meantime here, since I already kind of have it broken loose. So before I disconnect the alternator and the power steering pump, I want to disconnect this cable that goes to the battery. This runs this way across, and it comes down here to the starter. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this guy off. Actually, I didn't need to remove this one. I meant to remove this one. This guy right here. And we'll just disconnect it right here, and I'll try to round, and I'll try to get this cable through here, disconnect right here, so that this comes with the engine. I was able to get this cable out through the rubber grommet right here. I'll go ahead and remove it from right here as well. This one is for the alternator, that's gonna stay, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Also, you want to disconnect your fuel rail right here, the fuel line to the fuel rail. So there's 2 10s. You'll remove that, set it off to the side, and I'll probably look to see if there's any other lines connected. I think this evap line needs to come off as well. We also need to disconnect the line that goes in the back there for the heater hose. That hose right there needs to come off, and when I do it, it's probably gonna break, so I probably won't even bother disconnecting it. I'll probably just take it off with the engine. You'll do the same thing to the other hose in the back for the heater hose, which is actually right here, so you'll disconnect that. Alright guys, so as you can tell, I'm at the point that I'm pretty much ready to remove the engine. There is just 2 fasteners holding this on, which are the 2 fasteners for the motor mounts. Those should be 19mm or 17, I can't remember off the top of my head. But I did remove everything out of the way. I got the fuel line removed, the heater hose is disconnected, I have the power steering pump off to the side, alternator off to the side, AC compressor off to the side. Oh, I guess I can't forget, I'm gonna remove this ground here. I'll go ahead and remove these 2 12s and remove the ground. But other than that, everything is clear. A lot of things, something that a lot of you guys will forget is this little connection. It's kind of like a mini ground that goes to the header, I guess you can say shield. Anyways, that's mounted right here, so you want to go ahead and just unplug it. And aside from that, we're pretty much ready. Before you remove the 2 fasteners holding down the motor mounts, make sure that you have some tension on the strap so that the engine doesn't fall backwards. I'm gonna go underneath and do that now. So what I have to do now is lift up the engine a little bit more. When I have enough clearance, I'm gonna go on this side and remove one of the cats, and then that should give you enough room to get this guy out. Alright, so now that we have more clearance, I'm gonna go in there and remove the cat on one side, and then that should give us enough room to remove the engine. But we're almost there. Alright, so as you guys can see, I have the old engine and the old transmission out of the vehicle. There you guys have the two cats that I removed. This was a little bit more challenging than the G35/350Z just because there's not a lot of room to remove the cats. So it's questionable whether you should remove the cats before or after you start, jacking up the engine from the car. I was able to remove them, however, it was pretty difficult regardless. This other bolt didn't break. The demon bolt, it just came right out, which was good. But as you guys can see, we have the harness. We have pretty much everything still here besides the power steering pump, the AC compressor, the condenser, and all that stuff. Overall, it's not difficult. What is hard is these coolant hoses that go to the heater core. That's going to be the hardest part, trying to get them off. But if they're old, what you could do is just break them and replace them, which is what I did on this car. I just broke them clean off, and it came right out. Alright guys, so as you can tell, it's the next day. Right over here we have the replacement engine, and right here is the one that we just took out. I need to get the wiring harness from this engine along with the starter and pulleys and transfer it onto this engine. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. This is one of the main reasons why I decided to take the wiring harness with the engine, because as you can see, you have a ton of room and you're not gonna be finding anything while this is still on the vehicle. So as you can see, the wiring harness just kind of wraps around the whole engine and it's just a mess. So like this, you can clearly see what you need to remove to get the wiring harness off. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. And then like I said, once I have this guy pretty much ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and pick it up, put it back inside the car, and start putting everything back together. Alright guys, so about an hour later I finished putting this engine together. I have the pulleys on, I have the starter on, the wiring harness is all there, everything is bolted down and ready to go. So what I need to do now is put this engine back inside of the G37 coupe. I'm gonna make sure one more time just to see, you know, if there's any loose connections or anything like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my time right now and just look through everything carefully. But I'm pretty sure everything's good. The fun part comes now to install it back on the vehicle. I actually forgot to just install one more thing, and that is some test pipes. So I'm gonna put test pipes on it right now. They should clear the steering shaft. So I won't have any trouble with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those on right now, and then we'll put this on the vehicle. Alright guys, so as you can tell, we have the engine installed. Everything went pretty smooth. There is some things that I would like to point out that I think would make it easier for you guys. Definitely don't try to put the test pipes on or cats on when you're installing the engine. It just won't fit. I had to remove one of the test pipes on the driver's side in order for it to clear. Also, you should try to get at least somebody else to help you guide the engine in. Mine kind of just was going back and forth and ended up hitting the throttle body connector, and it cracked it. So that's something that you guys should look out for. Maybe you remove the throttle bodies to be on the safe side before you install everything. Another thing that made it easy to line everything up is to get a jack and kind of lift up the rear of the transmission so that they're kind of level going in. That made the biggest difference, lining everything up. And as you can see, everything's in there right now. I need to go through it and just fasten down the power steering pump, the AC compressor, the alternator, and the heater hoses. And then I need to connect the drive shaft and put everything back together. So I'm gonna finish this vehicle off camera. The installation is going to be the opposite of what we did, you know, to remove everything. So just, you know, go back in steps, I guess. It's not that difficult once you have everything in. At this point, it's just putting one piece at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now so that I can get this vehicle done as soon as possible. So I finished putting the car back together. There's still a little bit more that needs to be done, but I'm gonna do it off camera. But I wanted to kind of just turn it on, see if it turns on.
One hour later.
All right, guys, so it has been about 2 weeks since I swapped the engine on this G37, and it actually does pull pretty good, and it's running and driving pretty good. The owner has no complaints about the engine, and I did take it out for a quick drive right now, and it does pull freaking hard. So I'm glad I was able to help him out swap his engine, and we were able to save this G37 from the scraps. You were so close to parting it out, huh? He was about to part it out, but then he just, you know, he decided to get an engine, and he did everything here for pretty cheap. The engine swap and the install, and for how much I charged him. And right now it's driving and running pretty good, cold AC and everything. So it's been about 2 weeks, and it idles pretty good. He just needs to fix up the front bumper situation here, but other than that, it's in pretty good shape. This is pretty much gonna wrap the end of today's video. I hope you guys did find it entertaining and useful, at least for those that are swapping the engines on their G37 coupes. It can be a little bit difficult to install the engine, but if you get a buddy or two to help you out, it can be done relatively easy. You just need the right tools, and you need most of all patience, because I guarantee you guys will get pissed off doing this swap. But it really is not that bad, and I was able to do it out of my garage with no lift or anything like that. So if I can do it, you guys can do it as well. If you guys did like the content, make sure to give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Peace out.